We're all looking for ourselves. We read books, take personality tests, switch jobs, move cities, start spiritual practices, all hoping that this time we'll finally meet the person we were meant to be. But the more we search, the more lost we seem to feel. Why? Because the act of searching is built on a quiet assumption that something is missing. And when you believe you're incomplete, everything you do, even the most noble inner work, becomes another attempt to fix what was never broken. We compare ourselves to others, imagining they've found it while we're still behind. We treat identity like a project, one that can be completed with enough insight, enough discipline. But maybe the real self isn't hiding from us. Maybe we're hiding from it by constantly chasing the idea of who we should be. It's like standing in front of a mirror that only reflects what you're trying to become, never what's already there. One woman said she felt most distant from herself during her most productive years, always busy, always achieving, never quite arriving. Another man admitted he had read over 50 self-help books but still didn't feel closer to peace, because he was treating growth like a finish line. The search becomes addictive, not because we're failing, but because we don't realize we're already home. The question is no longer, who am I? But can I stop running long enough to simply listen? Because, as Alan Watts once said, trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth. The self we're trying to find, the one we imagine hidden somewhere beneath our flaws, waiting to be revealed, doesn't exist in the way we think it does. Think about it. You're at a crossroads in life. You start asking questions. Who am I really? What do I want? What's my purpose? So you start looking. You meditate. You journal. You travel. You try different careers. You meet people who seem to have figured it out, and you try to follow in their footsteps. But somewhere along the way, the journey becomes exhausting, and the image of your true self becomes another thing to chase, another identity to get right. You begin to wonder if maybe you're not spiritual enough, focused enough, healed enough. And suddenly, the search becomes a trap. Because when we chase an identity, we become actors in our own lives, performing the version of ourselves we think will be loved. We replace curiosity with pressure, wonder with anxiety. The soul becomes another task to optimize, another checkbox on the to-do list of becoming. We don't just seek truth, we market it, monetize it, turn it into aesthetic, and in the process, we lose touch with the quiet honesty of simply being. A man I once spoke to said he felt most fake at spiritual workshops, not because he didn't believe, but because he was always watching himself believe. Another woman said she never knew if she was meditating to find peace or just to prove she was doing the work. The pursuit of self can become a performance when we believe there's a prize at the end, but there is no final version of you waiting to be unlocked. There is only this unfolding self, raw, changing, and already worthy of love. The moment we stop performing is the moment we begin to meet ourselves. Have you ever thought, I'll feel like myself when I quit this job. I'll feel aligned when I move to that city. Or, when I finally figure out my passion, then I'll know who I am. But you get there, and it still feels incomplete. That's because identity isn't a destination. It's a movement, a moment-to-moment presence that can't be pinned down. We think clarity will come with the next big change, but often it fades once the novelty wears off. Like chasing a mirage, the closer you get, the more it moves away. One woman spent years believing that moving abroad would help her find herself, only to realize that her restlessness came with her. Another man kept reinventing his image online, hoping one version would finally feel real. But all he felt was more fragmented. True arrival only begins when we stop assuming it lies somewhere other than here. Even spiritual seekers fall into this trap, imagining enlightenment as a peak moment rather than an ordinary presence. One young man left his job to pursue meaning in nature, only to realize that silence didn't create clarity. It simply removed distraction. When we expect an external shift to fix an internal disconnection, we remain stuck in longing. Arrival happens not when you change your location, but when you let go of the idea that who you are is somewhere else. There is nowhere to get to, just something to wake up to, right here. And perhaps the soul isn't waiting on a better version of your life, but on your willingness to finally be in it. Watts believed the self is not a fixed object, it's a flowing process. You don't find yourself like lost keys. You realize yourself by simply being. Have you seen how children play? They're not trying to be authentic. They just are. They haven't learned to believe they're broken. They don't need to earn their existence. They inhabit it. There's no narrative, no performance, only presence. But as we grow older, we trade that spontaneity for control. We try to define ourselves with roles, labels, or brands. And yet, the more tightly we hold to who we think we are, the more anxious we feel about losing it. One woman who always saw herself as the strong one broke down in therapy when asked what she needed, because she had never asked herself that. Another man who was praised for being the smart one admitted he'd never pursued what he truly loved, only what maintained the image. The true self isn't a character, it's the awareness beneath all masks. And it doesn't need a name to be real. In a world obsessed with identity, it can feel terrifying to say, I don't know who I am. But maybe that's the most honest answer. A woman once said she only began to feel free when she stopped introducing herself by what she did, and started noticing how she felt. We aren't static beings waiting to be named. We are a process unfolding in real time. Who you are is not a title, a belief, or a past. It's the presence that holds them all. Letting go of labels doesn't make you less real. It makes you more alive. You are not something to grasp, but something to experience. Mia spent years trying to become her highest self. She did all the things, meditated daily, followed gurus, fasted, did yoga retreats. But deep down, she still felt not good enough. It was only when she stopped trying to become someone and started simply noticing her breath, her body, her life as it is, that something shifted. She didn't become someone new. She returned to someone very old, the quiet presence underneath all the trying. At first, the stillness terrified her. There were no affirmations to recite, no progress to measure, just silence. And in that silence, she finally noticed how hard she'd been working to prove she was worthy. She realized that all her rituals had become performances, attempts to spiritually earn self-love. Another woman she met on retreat confessed something similar. She feared that if she stopped striving, she would disappear. But it wasn't disappearing. It was dissolving the false self. In letting go, Mia didn't vanish. She became more real than ever before. And that, Alan Watts would say, is where life begins. not in becoming, but in surrendering. To explore how your hidden patterns may still be shaping your life, watch our video, Signs Your Shadow is Controlling Your Life, without you knowing. This kind of surrender isn't weakness, it's trust. It's the courage to let life flow through you without trying to direct every wave. A man once told me he stopped meditating when he realized he wasn't actually meditating. He was trying to achieve something through it. He said his first true moment of peace came not on the cushion, but when he sat with a cup of tea and allowed himself to just be. The path to presence isn't always dramatic. Often, it's invisible to others. But inside, something shifts, from proving to resting, from performing to existing. And in that gentle space, the self we've been chasing quietly returns home. Maybe that's the wisdom. You're not a puzzle to solve. You're a presence to embody. The more you relax into what you are, the more clearly you feel something deeper. Not an identity, but awareness. The part of you that doesn't need fixing, only witnessing. One man said he finally felt like himself, not during a breakthrough, but while watering his plants one quiet morning. Another woman described her most honest moment not during a retreat, but when she laughed, loudly and unfiltered, around old friends. It wasn't perfect, it wasn't planned, but it was real. Presence lives in those unscripted spaces. And when we stop trying to perfect the moment, we actually show up for it. We think we need to become someone before we can be loved. But often, it's in our unguarded moments that love finds us. A father once told me he felt most alive not when teaching his kids, but when simply sitting beside them in silence. No lessons, no roles, just presence. The self we long to become is often hidden in the moments we've dismissed as ordinary. What if being ready isn't about having it all figured out, but about showing up just as you are? That's where authenticity lives. Not in the ideal, but in the immediate. Daniel switched careers 3 times, hoping to find his thing. Marketing, coaching, then photography. But in every field, the same question kept haunting him. Is this really me? Eventually, he realized he was asking the wrong question. It wasn't about finding the one perfect identity. It was about bringing his full awareness and presence to whatever he chose to do. Daniel didn't find himself in a job title. He found himself in how he showed up for life. He noticed that the sense of meaning came not from the label on his business card, but from how present he was in small, quiet moments. Helping a client, noticing light through a window, listening deeply in a conversation. He had spent years trying to impress others with what he did, but presence had nothing to prove. Another friend of his had a similar awakening. After years of chasing creative recognition, she felt most alive while making art no one would ever see. What mattered wasn't how her work was perceived, but how deeply she connected with the act itself. When we stop chasing purpose and start participating fully in life, something deeper emerges. Not as a goal, but as a gift. Purpose becomes a byproduct of presence. Even the most mundane tasks can become sacred when we meet them with full attention. A man told me he began to feel purposeful not after a promotion, but while cooking dinner for his aging parents. Another woman said she found more of herself cleaning her apartment in silence than she ever had in years of planning her dream life. What if our real work isn't to find our path, but to walk whatever path we're on with love? We don't need a title to feel whole. We need a moment that invites us to be all there. And that moment is always now. Sometimes life gives us the answer in the most ordinary moments. Washing dishes, talking to a stranger, walking home at dusk. In those small pauses, when you stop trying to be someone, something deeper shows up. A quiet okayness, a sense of being enough without needing to explain why. That is your real self. Not the one you construct, but the one you feel when you finally stop pretending. One man said he felt most like himself while sitting on a park bench, feeding birds, not during a ceremony, but during stillness. A mother realized she felt most connected to her truth, not when she was alone, but when her child curled into her lap in silence. These moments weren't Instagrammable, but they were true. We often search for the self in the extraordinary, but it's the ordinary that quietly holds us. To meet yourself, you don't need to go far. You just need to stop running. The truth doesn't always arrive in lightning strikes. Sometimes it whispers through repetition. A man told me he realized who he was not during a retreat, but while doing laundry, when the scent of fresh cotton reminded him of his childhood home. The present carries pieces of your story, not to trap you in the past, but to remind you that you're still here. Selfhood is stitched together in the fabric of the everyday, in how you listen, how you breathe, how you pause. And when you're fully present, even the smallest gestures become sacred. The ordinary isn't the opposite of transformation. Sometimes it's where transformation quietly begins. If you've been searching for yourself, maybe it's time to stop. Not because you failed, but because what you're looking for isn't out there. It's here, in this breath, in this moment. And maybe, just maybe, you were never lost to begin with. A woman once said she realized she wasn't broken, just tired from carrying identities that never fit. A man confessed that his anxiety began to ease not when he found himself, but when he stopped running from stillness. Every time we pause, something beneath the noise begins to rise. It's not dramatic, it's not even loud, but it's real. Yourself is not hiding, it's waiting for your permission to be enough, just as it is. A young artist told me he stopped calling himself a creative and started simply creating, and in that simplicity, he found himself again. Another woman said she no longer introduces herself with her job title. Instead, she begins with what brings her alive. Sometimes the self we're trying to discover is already speaking, just in a voice softer than the noise we're used to hearing. Real presence doesn't announce itself. It doesn't need validation. It waits, in quiet, in slowness, in moments we've overlooked. And when we finally turn inward with gentleness, we find that we've always been here, patiently waiting to be seen. You don't become yourself. You remember. You don't fix your way into wholeness. You see through the illusion that you were ever broken. Alan Watts reminded us that life is not a problem to be solved, but an experience to be danced. And when you stop chasing an idea of who you should be, you give life permission to unfold as it truly is, spontaneous, imperfect, and deeply real. The beauty of this realization is that nothing outside you needs to change. Not your job, not your relationship, not your body, or your past. What changes is the way you relate to all of it, not from fear or striving, but from openness. This is where self-love begins. not in perfecting the self, but in embracing its raw and unfinished edges. You stop needing to earn rest, love, or worth, and begin to recognize they were never outside your reach. You no longer fear the quiet, because you know what lives there is true. You become less interested in becoming impressive and more curious about being real. And that quiet realness is what brings us home. Because the journey was never about arriving anywhere. It was about remembering we were never lost. If this message resonated with you, subscribe to The Art of Being. Here, we explore the timeless wisdom of Alan Watts, Carl Jung, and others who invite us to live more consciously, more honestly, and more freely. This is not a channel about becoming someone. It's a place to remember the self you never truly left. Join us. The journey inward is the greatest adventure of all. It explores how the parts of us we reject often choose our relationships, and how healing begins when we start seeing clearly.